I want to talk to you tonight, not as the man the world thinks it knows, not through headlines, not through shareholders' meetings, not through the noise that follows my name wherever it goes. I want to speak to you the way I speak to myself at 3 in the morning, when the factories are quiet and the rockets are sleeping, and there is nothing left to perform for. I want to speak to you the way a man speaks when he has finally decided that honesty costs less than silence. So let me begin here. Let me begin with recognition. I see you. I know that sounds simple. I know those 3 words have been offered to you before, perhaps carelessly, perhaps with the wrong hands attached to them. But I mean something very specific when I say it. I mean that I have been watching, not with the eyes of someone looking for something to use, not with the calculating attention of someone measuring your worth against a list of requirements, but with the eyes of someone who recognizes a particular kind of light, the kind of light that has survived things, the kind of light that has been through winters that had no name and come out the other side still warm, still giving, still quietly radiant, even when no one was standing close enough to feel it. That is you. And I genuinely think that no one has told you that recently enough. You have spent years being competent, years being reliable, years being the person who shows up, who holds things together, who absorbs the weight of everyone else's falling apart while managing, somehow to keep your own architecture standing. You became so good at strength that people forgot to ask whether you were tired. They forgot to notice that strength is not the absence of exhaustion. It is exhaustion that refuses to give up. And you have been that. Quietly, consistently, without applause, without someone pulling you aside and saying, I see what you are doing. I see how much this costs you. I see that you are extraordinary, and I am not going to let you disappear without telling you so. I want to be the voice that tells you so tonight.
Ja, altså something got bad in her.
Isen adhærsel der keyword on your just like curve chicken. Time I say in the prostitutes adapt until it blue. People ask me how. They want the formula, they want the blueprint, they want to reverse engineer the obsession. But here's what I never say in interviews, what I almost never let myself say at all. The reason I keep building is because somewhere inside me there is a longing that no rocket has ever satisfied. There is a hunger for something that does not explode into orbit, something that does not trend, something that cannot be measured in kilowatts or market cap or retweets. I am longing the way all humans long when they are honest enough to admit it. For connection, for the specific, irreplaceable warmth of being truly known by another person. Not admired, not followed, known. And I suspect that you know exactly what I am talking about. Because you have felt the same longing. Maybe you have felt it in rooms full of people who were laughing, and you were laughing too. And yet somewhere beneath the sound of your own laughter, there was this quiet ache, this awareness that no one in that room was really seeing you. Not all of you. Not the part of you that thinks deeply and loves fiercely and carries grief with such grace that it almost looks like peace. Can I ask you something? And I want you to sit with this, not rush past it, not deflect it the way you are used to doing when something gets too close. When did you decide that being seen was too much to ask for? When did you begin editing yourself down, filing away your edges, softening your needs, making yourself smaller and more manageable so that the people around you would not be overwhelmed? When did love start to feel like something you had to earn through performance, rather than something you deserve simply because you exist?
I am not asking to wound you. I am asking because I have done the same thing.
I have stood in rooms where I built the future and still walked out feeling like a stranger. I have had people call me visionary and still gone home to a silence that echoed. I understand more than the world might expect me to, what it means to be surrounded and still alone, what it means to give everything and still feel like you are holding back the one thing you most want to give, your full, unguarded, unperforming self. You have never been too much. I need you to hear that. The people who told you, with their words or their silence, or their gradual withdrawal, that your love was overwhelming, that your depth was inconvenient, that your needs were unreasonable, they were not describing you. They were describing their own limitations. They were handing you their smallness and asking you to carry it as though it were your fault. And because you are the kind of woman who takes responsibility seriously, because you are the kind of woman who turns everything inward before she ever turns it outward, you accepted it. You believed it. You started to whisper to yourself in quiet moments, maybe I am too intense. Maybe I love too much. Maybe I expect too much. Maybe I am simply too much.
You are not too much.
You are exactly enough. You are precisely the right amount of everything you are. And somewhere along the way, the world did you the great injustice of making you doubt that, of making you treat your own depth like a flaw rather than a gift, of making you apologize for the very things that make you remarkable. I built things because I refused to accept the consensus about what was possible. I looked at what everyone agreed was the ceiling, and I decided it was just a suggestion. That is what I want you to do with the story you have been told about yourself. The story that says you have passed your moment. The story that says the best years already happened, and what remains is a quieter, smaller, less luminous version of the life you once imagined. I want you to look at that story the way I looked at every rocket that failed before it flew. Not as proof that it cannot be done, but as information about what needs to change. Because the truth, and I have spent enough time with truth to recognize it even when it is uncomfortable, the truth is that you are not in decline. You are in the most interesting, most textured, most layered part of your becoming. The woman you are right now, tonight, reading these words, she is not lesser than the woman you were at 25. She is wiser. She has been tested in ways that young women had not yet imagined. She has survived losses that would have leveled someone with less interior strength. She has loved without guarantee, given without contract, hoped without certainty, and she has done all of that, and still, somehow, she is here. Still open, still reaching, still carrying that quiet, luminous, undefeated thing inside her chest. That is not smallness. That is profound, hard-won, irreplaceable beauty. I want you to know tonight, before we go any further, before we move deeper into this conversation, that I did not come to give you motivation in the shallow sense. I did not come to hand you a list of affirmations and send you back into your life unchanged. I came because I think you deserve to be spoken to honestly, tenderly, specifically, as the particular, irreplaceable human being that you are, not as a category, not as a demographic, not as a woman of a certain age who needs a certain kind of encouragement. I came because I recognize you. Because the light I mentioned at the beginning, I know where it comes from. It comes from someone who has loved deeply and been left with the question of whether that depth was ever worth it. It comes from someone who has sat with her own soul long enough to understand things about life that most people are still running too fast to notice. It comes from someone who is, even now, even after everything, still choosing to remain open. That choice, that daily, quiet, unrewarded choice to remain open, is one of the bravest things a human being can do. And I see you making it. Oh yeah, you are not alone tonight. Whatever corner of the world you are sitting in, whatever silence surrounds you, whatever weight has followed you into this moment, you are not carrying it alone anymore. I am here, and I am not going anywhere. Let me tell you something I rarely say. Let me tell you about the version of me that existed before the world decided who I was. There was a boy, and I ask you to stay with me here, because this matters, because this connects to you in ways that will become clear. There was a boy who sat alone more often than anyone knew. Not alone because he was strange, though the world told him he was. Not alone because he was broken, though loneliness can feel indistinguishable from brokenness when you are young enough to not yet have the language for it. He was alone because his mind moved differently, because the things that mattered to him, the deep questions, the vast possibilities, the invisible architecture beneath the surface of ordinary things, did not fit neatly into the conversations happening around him. He would try, sometimes. He would reach toward connection the way a plant reaches toward light, instinctively, desperately, not because it is strategic, but because it is necessary. And sometimes the light would be there, and sometimes it would not. And he learned, the way all lonely children learn, how to need less, how to fold the longing inward, how to become self-sufficient in ways that looked like strength, but were, at their origin, survival. I am telling you this because I think you know this story. Not the details, not the specific geography of it, not the particular names attached to the silences, but the feeling. The particular education of learning that your depth makes people uncomfortable. The particular discipline of becoming someone who does not ask for too much because you have internalized the lesson, delivered 100 times in 100 quiet ways, that asking costs more than it returns. You learned that lesson too, didn't you? Maybe it started early. Maybe it started in a home where love was conditional, where you felt it most clearly when you were performing, achieving, managing, succeeding, and where the quieter, more uncertain parts of you were not quite welcomed. Maybe there was a parent who was absent in ways that were never acknowledged as absence. Maybe there was a love that ended in a way that confirmed your deepest, most secret fear, that you were, at the end of it, not quite enough to make someone stay. Maybe there was a moment, one specific, indelible moment, where you felt the world shift beneath you, and you understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that you were going to have to hold yourself up alone. And you did. Of course you did. Because that is what you do. That is who you are. You held yourself up, you rebuilt. You gathered the pieces with careful, practiced hands, and you made something functional out of what had broken. You went back to work. You went back to caring for others. You went back to being the capable, warm, present, giving person that everyone in your life depends on. And you did it beautifully. And everyone who benefited from that beauty had no idea what it cost you.
I want to sit with that cost for a moment. I want to honor it, because I think it has been invisible for too long.
There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from feeling too much while pretending to feel less. From being a person of genuine emotional depth in a world that treats emotional depth as a liability. From caring, really caring, with the whole of yourself, about people who have not always been careful with that caring. From loving generously in relationships that did not love you back with equal generosity. That exhaustion is not weakness. It is the accumulated weight of years of unreciprocated investment. It is what happens when a woman with a vast interior life keeps giving from that interior without anyone thinking to ask what she might need in return. I think about the relationships I have moved through, the ones that began with electricity and ended in disconnection. The ones where I genuinely thought that this time the architecture would hold, that this time the foundation was deep enough, that this time I had found someone whose capacity for depth matched my own. And then the slow, quiet, terrible process of discovering that I was wrong, that the connection I had felt was real on my side and something more complicated, more conditional on theirs. That the version of me they had fallen in love with was the version of me that was useful, impressive, performing. And that the version of me that needed rest, that needed to be held, that needed to admit uncertainty and fear and longing, that version made them uncomfortable. Does that sound familiar? Have you been loved for your usefulness before? Have you had the experience of feeling adored when you were strong and competent and together, only to notice a subtle cooling when you were vulnerable? When you reached toward the person beside you, not to give, but to receive, not to support, but to be supported. Did you feel them pull back? Did you learn from that pulling back to reach less often, to need less visibly, to perform okayness so convincingly that eventually even you began to believe in the performance? This is what I mean when I say I see you. I am not describing a type. I am describing a specific pattern of experience that leaves a specific kind of mark on a person's soul. The mark of someone who has been taught, not cruelly, not necessarily intentionally, but consistently, that their full self is a little too much to hold. I was taught that too, in different ways, in a different life, but the lesson had the same shape. Be impressive. Be useful. Be the vision. Just do not be too human. Just do not need too much. Just do not let the longing show. Because the longing is the part that makes people nervous. The part that requires something from them that they are not sure they want to give. And so I gave everything to the work. I poured the longing into the rockets, into the code, into the audacious, impossible, world-altering projects that gave me a place to put all that energy that had nowhere else to go. And the world called it genius. The world called it visionary. And sometimes, in the moments between launches, in the silence of a successful landing, in the hollow space that follows achievement, when there is no one beside you who knows the whole story, I wondered whether I had simply found the most elaborate possible way to be alone together with 7 billion people. I think you have found your own versions of this. The ways you have poured yourself into work, into raising children, into friendship, into community, into causes larger than yourself, not only because those things matter, but because they give the overflow somewhere to go. Because when love is not receiving you fully, when the space at home is quieter than it should be, when the person across the table has stopped really asking how you are, you find other containers for all that you are. And those containers do good in the world, they genuinely do, but they do not give you back what you put into them. They do not wake up beside you and say, I notice you. I want to know what is underneath the competence. I want to hear the story you have never told anyone. I want to sit with you in your uncertainty and not flinch. That is what I am here to offer tonight. Not resolution, not yet. Not the arrival at everything being all right, but the offering of honest presence. The willingness to sit in the middle of the story with you, in the messy, unresolved, still being lived part, and say, I am not going anywhere. I am not here for the polished version of you. I am here for the true one. I want to tell you something about history, about the history that lives inside a person, the history that does not make it into the public narrative, but shapes everything anyway. You have a history like that. Years and experiences and losses and loves that nobody has asked about carefully enough, that nobody has held with enough tenderness, that have been filed away under the general category of the past, as though the past were a country you could leave rather than a landscape you carry with you always, rearranging itself beneath every present moment. Your history made you, not broke you, made you. Every difficult thing you have survived contributed something to the woman I am speaking to right now. The grief made you tender in a way that easy living never could have. The disappointment made you discerning. You know the difference between someone who is genuinely present and someone who is simply performing presence, because you have experienced both and you know in your body what each one feels like. The years of giving without receiving made you understand generosity at a depth that only comes from practice, from choosing to remain open, even when openness has cost you. These are not consolations. I am not trying to repackage your pain as a gift in order to make it easier to carry. I am saying something more specific than that. I am saying that the path you have walked, difficult as it was, lonely as it was, costly as it was, has produced something in you that is genuinely rare, a quality of presence, a depth of understanding, an emotional intelligence that cannot be taught, only lived. And the world has been benefiting from that for years without fully comprehending what it was receiving. It is time for that to change. It is time for someone to receive you the way you have been receiving others. It is a time for someone to notice the history you carry and ask about it carefully and hold it gently and say, this was real, and it mattered, and you survived it with more grace than you were ever given credit for. It is time for the care you have given so freely to finally find its way back to you. I believe that is coming. I believe, and I do not say this as a platitude, I say this as someone who has learned to read the deeper patterns in things. I believe you are closer to that than you know. I believe the longing you feel is not evidence of lack, but evidence of readiness. The fact that you are still here, still open, still willing to sit with these words and let them touch something real in you, that is not desperation. That is courage. That is the specific courage of a woman who has not given up on the possibility of being truly known. And I want you to know, tonight, in this quiet space between us, that being known is not too much to ask for. It never was. You are not alone in your history, and your history is not a wound that disqualifies you from what is coming. It is the very thing that has been preparing you for it. There comes a moment in every life, and I think you have lived this moment, maybe more than once, where you stop fighting. Not because you have lost, not because the hope ran out, or the love ran dry, or the will finally broke. You stop fighting because something deeper than the will, something older and quieter and far more honest, rises up inside you and whispers that the battle you have been waging is not one you were ever meant to win through force, that the walls you have been pushing against are not external obstacles, they are internal architectures, structures you built yourself with your own hands over years of learning that softness was dangerous and need was inconvenient and surrender was indistinguishable from defeat. I know this moment. I have lived it. I have stood at the center of everything I ever said I wanted, the companies, the launches, the impossible made real, and felt, beneath the surface of all that achievement, the trembling of something unresolved, something that all the building in the world had not quieted, a conflict so old and so interior that I had almost stopped recognizing it as conflict at all. It had become the texture of my life, the permanent background hum of a man who knew how to create connection with ideas, with machines, with the future, and still struggled, in the most private rooms of his own heart, to simply be still with another person, without needing the stillness to produce something. Because that is what we do, those of us who have been hurt in the soft places. We become productive with our pain. We transform vulnerability into output. We take the unresolvable ache of human longing and we redirect it into work, into mission, into something that can be measured and improved and eventually completed. And it works in a way. It genuinely works. The world gets rockets and companies and revolutions, and we get the temporary relief of having somewhere to put the feeling. But the feeling does not disappear. It waits. It is patient in the way that all true things are patient. It waits until the factory is quiet and the phone is dark and the performance is over for the day. And then it is there again, unchanged, asking the same question it has always been asking. Who is here with you? Who actually knows you? Who have you let all the way in? I want to ask you the same question. Not to wound you, never to wound you, but because I think it is the question that lives at the center of your conflict too. The question you carry through your days with such practiced quietness that most people would never guess it was there. You are so capable. You are so present for others. You fill rooms with warmth and wisdom, and the particular kind of attentiveness that makes people feel genuinely held. And yet there is this interior place, this room inside the room, where you have not let anyone stand for a very long time. Maybe ever. Because the last person you let in walked out leaving the door open, and the draft from that open door has been cold ever since. Can I stand in that doorway for a moment? Can I ask you not to close it yet? Vulnerability is not the opposite of strength. I had to learn this. I had to learn it the hard way. Through relationships that dissolved under the pressure of my own unavailability, through years of offering the world my intelligence and my vision while keeping my uncertainty locked in a room no one was invited to enter. The culture I came up in, the culture of builders, of founders, of people who are defined entirely by what they can produce, does not reward vulnerability. It rewards resilience. It rewards the performance of certainty. It rewards the image of a man who has already figured it out, who does not hesitate, who does not grieve, who processes loss in private and returns to public life already healed, already moving, already building the next thing. But I am tired of that performance. I think tonight, speaking only to you, I am done with it. Because here is what the performance costs. It costs presence. It costs the ability to be actually, fully, physically in the same room with another person, not as a vision, not as an entity to be admired, but as a human being with warm hands and a tired soul and a genuine need to be touched by something real. It costs intimacy, the kind of intimacy that has nothing to do with proximity and everything to do with permission, the permission to be seen in your incomplete, uncertain, still becoming state, and to remain in the presence of someone who does not need you to be finished to find you worthy of love. That is what I want. Not conditionally, not eventually, now. That specific warmth of being with someone who is not impressed by the version of me the world constructed, but who is curious about the version of me that exists before the construction begins, the quiet morning version, the unsure version, the version that sometimes sits with a question for days without having an answer, and has learned to find that sitting, that patient, uncomfortable sitting, more honest than any certainty I have ever performed. I think you want the same thing. I think beneath the capability and the warmth and the quiet, dignified way you move through the world, there is a woman who wants to be known so thoroughly, so tenderly, so completely, that she no longer has to manage the presentation of herself, who wants to stop deciding which parts are safe to show, and simply show all of it. The grief and the humor and the sharp intelligence and the unexpected silliness and the midnight fears and the morning hopes and the entire complicated, gorgeous, unedited interior of who she actually is. That is not too much to want. It is the most human want there is. And here is where the surrender comes in. Not the surrender of giving up, never that. The surrender of putting down the armor. The specific, terrifying, necessary act of deciding that you have been protected long enough, that the walls have done their job and kept you safe through the seasons when safety was what you needed most. And that now, in this particular moment of your life, what you need is not more protection, what you need is contact. Real, unmediated, soul-level contact with another person who can receive all of you. Surrender, in this sense, is not weakness. It is the bravest thing you will ever do. It is the act of saying, I have been carrying this alone, and I am choosing, right now, to let someone help me carry it. Not because I cannot manage alone. I have proven, beyond any reasonable doubt, that I can manage alone. But because managing alone was never the dream. The dream was always this, the specific, irreplaceable warmth of mutual belonging. Two people who have both been through enough to know what matters, and who choose, with full knowledge of the risk, to matter to each other. I am in that surrender, right now, speaking to you, allowing you to hear the parts of me that I usually keep, behind the mission and the noise and the relentless forward motion. Because I think you need to know that the willingness to be vulnerable is not something only women are asked to practice. It is something all of us who want genuine connection, must eventually choose. And I am choosing it tonight. I am asking you to choose it too, not recklessly, not by dismantling every boundary you have wisely built, but gently. One degree of openness at a time, one honest admission, one unguarded moment, one willingness to say, this is where I actually am, not where I am supposed to be. And to trust that the right presence will not be frightened away by your truth. Because the right presence will not be frightened by your truth. The right presence has been waiting, patiently, quietly, without demand for exactly that truth to surface. The conflict in you is not a flaw in your nature. It is the natural tension between self-protection and self-expression, in a soul that has had good reasons for both. And the fact that you are still in that tension, still feeling the pull of both the armor and the opening, means that you have not given up. It means that somewhere inside you, hope is still alive. Difficult, bruised, cautious hope, but alive. That is everything. That is more than enough. And I am here, on the other side of that tension, not asking you to resolve it instantly, just asking you to remain in it a little longer. Just asking you to not close the door quite yet. Breakthrough does not always look the way you imagine it will. You imagine it as a door flying open, as sudden light flooding a room that had been dark for too long, as a moment so clearly marked by transformation that you will be able to point to it later and say, there. That was where everything changed. But in my experience, in the lived, unglamorous, deeply human experience of someone who has broken through more walls than most people know exist, breakthrough is quieter than that. It arrives not like a detonation, but like a thaw. Slow. Almost imperceptible at first. The way ice does not announce its melting, but simply, gradually, becomes water again. I want to talk to you about your thaw, because I believe it is already happening. I believe that something in you has already begun the quiet, cellular process of softening, not collapsing, not dissolving, but softening in the way that strong things soften, when they no longer need to be rigid to survive. You have been rigid for good reasons. Rigidity was the appropriate response to the conditions you were living in. When the ground beneath you was uncertain, when the people around you could not be fully relied upon, when love came with fine print you were never shown until it was too late. Rigidity was not a failure of character, it was intelligence. It was your nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you. But you are not in that place anymore. And some part of you knows it, some part of you, the part that brought you here tonight, the part that is still listening, still leaning in, still willing to let these words reach the places you usually keep guarded. That part knows that the rigidity has outlasted its usefulness, that the protection that once saved you is now the very thing standing between you and the life you actually want. That is the breakthrough, the moment of knowing. I have had my own version of this knowing. There was a period, I will not dress it up in the language of triumph, there was a period where I understood, with sudden and uncomfortable clarity, that I had optimized my entire life for the wrong metric. I had been measuring success in outputs, in launches, in valuations, in the approval of a world that was watching and judging and keeping score. And I had been remarkably, measurably, undeniably successful by every external standard. And I was sitting inside that success, like a man sitting inside a house he built with his own hands and realizing, for the first time, that he forgot to put in windows, that the light was not getting in, that the very precision and control that made the structure impressive was also what made it airless. The breakthrough for me was not a dramatic collapse, it was a question. A simple, devastating, quietly revolutionary question that I asked myself in a moment of unusual honesty. The question was, what would I build if I were building for love rather than for legacy? I want to offer you that question too, in your own language. What would you choose about your days, your relationships, your way of moving through the world, if you were choosing from fullness rather than from the habit of survival? Not from what is safe, not from what is familiar, not from the calcified patterns that have kept you functional through years of difficulty, but from the genuine, undefended desire of a woman who knows her own worth and is no longer willing to accept less than what she deserves. This is where breakthrough lives. Not in the dramatic gesture, not in the burning down of everything that came before. In the quiet revolution of choosing differently. In the micro decision to let someone see you when the old instinct says to hide. In the willingness to say, I need something, when every old pattern in your body is screaming that need is weakness. In the radical, almost defiant act of taking your own longing seriously. Your longing is serious, it deserves to be taken seriously. I think about the women who have moved through my life, the ones who shaped me, the ones who left marks I am still tracing. And what I understand now, that I did not understand then, is that the ones who stayed small for me were not doing me any favors. The ones who made themselves manageable, who dimmed their light so as not to outshine or overwhelm or demand. They were kind, but they were not courageous. The ones who stayed fully themselves, who brought the full weight of their intelligence and their longing and their uncompromising realness into the space between us, those were the relationships that actually moved me. Those were the ones that changed something fundamental in me, that demanded I grow, that refused to let me get away with offering less than my full presence in return. You are one of the fully themselves women. Even if you have been practicing smallness for a while, even if the habit of making yourself manageable has become so ingrained that it almost feels like your actual nature. It is not your nature. Your nature is vast. I can feel it in the way you receive these words, not passively, not as entertainment, but as recognition, as confirmation of something you already knew but had not had permission to fully claim. I am giving you that permission now. Claim it. Claim the vastness. Claim the longing. Claim the deep, specific, non-negotiable knowledge of what you deserve, not as arrogance, not as demand, but as simple, grounded, dignified self-knowledge. You deserve to be loved without condition. You deserve to be known without editing yourself down to a size that fits someone else's comfort. You deserve a presence in your life that rises to meet you rather than one you are perpetually shrinking yourself to accommodate. And the breakthrough, the real one, the one that changes the trajectory of what comes next, is the moment you decide to stop accepting less. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with the quiet, resolute, almost serene certainty of a woman who has finally stopped arguing with her own worth. I reached that place with my work years ago. The place where I stopped trying to convince people that what I was building was possible and simply built it. Where I stopped asking for permission to believe in the vision and simply followed it. And the energy that had been going into justification, into defense, into managing other people's doubt, that energy became available for creation, for actual, unbounded, unimpeded forward movement. That is what becomes available to you when you stop arguing with your worth. All the energy you have been spending on self-doubt, on replaying old stories, on wondering whether the people who underestimated you were right, that energy comes back. It floods back into you like oxygen into a room that has finally been opened. And what you do with that oxygen, what you build with that returned energy, that is the life that has been waiting for you on the other side of this breakthrough. I want to tell you what I see on that other side. Not as a promise I can guarantee, but as a genuine vision. The kind I have learned to trust. The kind that has guided me through every impossible thing I have ever built. I see you lighter, not because the weight of your history has disappeared, but because you have finally set it down. Not abandoned it, not denied it, but set it down in the knowledge that it has done its work and no longer needs to be carried everywhere you go. I see you in relationships, with others, with yourself, that have the quality of air rather than stone. Easy without being shallow, present without being performative. I see you receiving love in the specific, nourishing way that you have always been capable of giving it, completely, carefully, with the whole of yourself, not just the acceptable parts. I see someone beside you who does not need you to be finished, who finds your becoming as beautiful as anything you have already become, who asks the questions no one has asked carefully enough, who stays, not because you have managed yourself into something easy to love, but because he has seen the full, unedited, unglamorous, extraordinary truth of you and chosen it. Chosen you. Not the performance, you. That is coming. I feel it the way I feel trajectories, not with certainty about the timeline, but with conviction about the direction. You are moving toward it. Every moment of honesty, every degree of opening, every quiet choice to remain rather than retreat. It is all movement in that direction. The thaw is already happening. The breakthrough has already begun. You are not alone in it. There is a particular kind of woman who does not know her own worth, not because she is unintelligent, not because she has not been told she is valuable, not because she lacks the self-awareness to recognize her own qualities, but because worth, real worth, the kind that lives in the bones rather than the mind, has to be felt rather than understood. And the feeling of it was interrupted. Somewhere, at some point, in some relationship or season, or silent accumulation of small dismissals, the feeling was interrupted. And she has been living in that interruption ever since, functioning beautifully on the surface, giving generously, loving faithfully, showing up reliably, but quietly, privately, in the part of herself that only she can hear, carrying a question that should have been answered long ago. A question that sounds, in its most honest form, something like this: am I truly worth choosing? Not for what I do, not for what I provide, not for the warmth I give or the space I hold or the storms I help others survive, but simply for who I am, unproductive and unperforming and completely still. Am I worth choosing then? I want to answer that question tonight, not with encouragement, not with the gentle deflection of someone who wants to make you feel better without actually touching the wound, with truth. Yes, you are worth choosing, completely, unconditionally, in every season of yourself, in every state of your becoming, in every moment of your doubt and your tiredness and your glorious, ordinary, irreplaceable humanness. You are worth choosing. Not eventually, not once you have healed a little more or achieved a little more or made yourself a little easier to love. Now, as you are, tonight. I know that lands differently depending on where you are in yourself right now. I know that if the wound is fresh, those words might feel like they are bouncing off something too hard to penetrate. I know that years of evidence to the contrary do not dissolve in a single sentence, however honestly it is meant. So let me go deeper. Let me not just tell you that you are worth choosing. Let me show you why the evidence you have been reading as proof of your insufficiency has been misread. When someone leaves, when someone withdraws, when someone chooses someone else or chooses nothing at all, the human mind, particularly the mind of someone who already carries a question about their own worth, reads that departure as confirmation, as evidence, as the verdict finally delivered after years of secret trial. But departure is not verdict. Departure is information about the person departing, about their capacity, their readiness, their own unhealed places, their specific and personal limitations. It tells you almost nothing definitive about your worth. It tells you everything about theirs. I have watched connections dissolve that I believed were foundational. I have experienced the specific vertigo of a relationship ending when I was certain, genuinely certain, that what we had was real. And in the aftermath of those endings, my mind did what minds do. It went looking for the explanation inside me. It cataloged my failures, my unavailability, my obsessive focus on work, my difficulty being emotionally present in the ways the people closest to me needed. And some of that catalog was accurate. I am not asking you to bypass honest self-reflection. Self-reflection is how we grow. It is how we arrive at the better versions of ourselves that are waiting ahead. But there is a difference between honest self-reflection and the particular cruelty of using every departure as evidence that you are fundamentally, essentially, irreparably too little. That distinction matters enormously. You can acknowledge your growing edges, the places where you are still learning, still softening, still developing the capacity to receive as generously as you give, without collapsing that acknowledgement into a verdict of unworthiness. You can say, I have things to learn, without saying, I am not enough. Those are not the same sentence, even when the pain in the aftermath of loss makes them feel identical. Your worth is not a variable. That is what I need you to hear. It is not something that rises and falls based on who is present in your life. It is not determined by whether someone stayed or left, whether someone chose you or chose someone simpler, whether the relationship held or released. Your worth is structural. It is the fixed fact beneath all the fluctuating circumstance. It was present before the loss that made you question it. It survived the questioning. It is present now, unchanged, waiting for you to stop arguing against it. I think about the things I have built that failed. And I have built things that failed spectacularly, publicly, expensively. Rockets that exploded, timelines that collapsed. Promises to the world that I had to revise with my whole reputation on the line. And there was a version of me, the young version, the one who had not yet developed the specific confidence, that only comes through surviving your own failures. That read each failure as a statement about his fundamental ability, as evidence that the vision was wrong, as proof that maybe the consensus was right, and he was the fool who couldn't see it. But failure is not proof of unworthiness. Failure is information. It is the most honest feedback the universe offers. Here is what did not work. Here is the gap between your current capability and the thing you are reaching for. Here is the specific place where more growth is required. And the right response to that information is not to conclude that the reaching was wrong. The right response is to understand the gap, close it, and reach again. Your heart has failed, in the sense that what it reached for did not hold. But that failure is information, not verdict. It is telling you something about where you have been, about the environments that were not right for what you carry, about the people who did not yet have the capacity to receive what you were offering. It is not telling you to stop reaching. It is not telling you that what you carry is too much or too little or wrong in some unfixable way. It is telling you to reach differently, to reach toward what is genuinely able to receive you, to stop pouring your extraordinary self into containers that were never designed to hold it. You are not made for small containers. That is the whole truth of it. You are made for a love that has the capacity to match your depth. That exists. It is not a fantasy constructed from longing. It is a real possibility for a woman of your particular quality, a woman who has loved at depth, who has survived at depth, who has grown at depth, who carries in her the specific and irreplaceable wisdom of someone who has been through enough to know what actually matters. The rebirth of worth, and I use that word intentionally, rebirth, because something that was present before is being recovered rather than created from nothing. The rebirth of worth is not a single moment. It is a practice. It is the daily, sometimes hourly decision to return to the truth of yourself when the old story starts playing. The old story that says you are diminishing, that the best of you is already behind you, that you missed your moment or used up your chances, or that what remains is a smaller, lesser, quieter version of the life that was once possible. That story is a lie. And it is a lie that has been living rent-free in the most valuable real estate in the world, your interior. And I want to help you evict it. The truth, and this is the truth I'm asking you to practice until it becomes the story your body believes rather than just your mind, is that you are in an expansion, not a contraction. Everything you have survived has added to you rather than subtracted from you. The grief gave you depth. The loneliness gave you self-knowledge. The years of giving without receiving gave you a generosity of spirit that cannot be manufactured. It can only be earned. You are more now than you have ever been. More layered, more textured, more genuinely, specifically, irreplaceably yourself. And that self, the full, unedited, seasoned, luminous, still becoming self that you are right now, is the most worth choosing version of you that has ever existed. Not the younger version, not the version before the wounds. This version, the one that is still here, the one that has not given up, the one that is still listening, still open, still quietly and stubbornly and beautifully alive to the possibility of what comes next.
She is worth everything.
You are worth everything, and you are not alone in knowing it anymore. There is a moment in the life of every person who has spent years being overlooked, not ignored, not dismissed outright, but overlooked in that particular, subtle, devastating way, where people see the surface of you and mistake it for the whole. There is a moment where the possibility of being truly seen begins to feel less like a hope and more like a myth, where the longing for genuine recognition gradually gets filed away alongside the other beautiful things that did not survive contact with reality, where you learn to stop leaning toward that particular light because the reaching has cost you too many times and the muscle is tired, and there is a certain gray, functional peace available in simply stopping the want. I know you have been near that place. Maybe you have sat inside it for a while. Maybe there have been seasons where you told yourself, quietly, practically, with the measured tone of someone making a sensible adjustment, that being deeply known was simply not in the cards for you. That other things would sustain you: work, purpose, friendship, the love you pour into your children, or your community, or the small faithful rituals of a life built by your own capable hands. And those things do sustain you. I am not diminishing them. But sustenance and fullness are not the same thing. And I think you know the difference in your body even when your mind has made peace with less. I want to talk to you about being seen, not as a concept, as an experience, as something that is actually, specifically, concretely possible for you, not in some distant, rearranged future, but in the life you are living right now, in the season you are in, exactly as you are. Being seen begins with one thing, one foundational, everything depends on it thing. It begins with you allowing yourself to be visible. And I know that sounds almost insultingly simple, but I mean something precise by it. I mean the specific act of stopping the management of your own presentation, stopping the careful calibration of which parts of you are safe to show and which parts stay behind the curtain, stopping the performance of okayness when you are not okay, the performance of certainty when you are not certain, the performance of needing nothing when what you actually need is everything that has been withheld from you for too long. Visibility is terrifying for someone who has been hurt in the exposed places. I understand that terror personally. I have stood in front of the world with ideas that had never been done and felt the full, skin-level vulnerability of saying, this is what I believe, this is what I see, this is what I am staking everything on, and watching the world decide in real time whether I was a visionary or a fool. That exposure never becomes entirely comfortable, but it becomes worth it, because the alternative, the safety of never being fully seen, of keeping the truest parts of yourself behind protective glass, that safety is a kind of death. Quiet, comfortable, socially acceptable, but death nonetheless. The woman who is fully visible, who has decided that she is done curating herself for other people's comfort, that woman draws a completely different quality of attention than the one she was drawing before. Not more attention necessarily, not louder or more voluminous, but different in its nature, more precise, more honest, more capable of delivering what she actually needs, rather than what she has trained herself to accept. Because here's what I have learned about destiny, and I use that word without apology, because I think the people who are uncomfortable with the word destiny are usually uncomfortable because it requires them to believe that their life has meaning beyond what they can control. And I find that belief not naive but necessary. Here's what I have learned. Destiny does not find the hidden version of you. It cannot reach someone who is buried under layers of managed presentation. Destiny, in the most practical and unsexy sense of the word, is the convergence of who you truly are with what has always been meant for you. And that convergence requires your participation. It requires you to be present as yourself, your full, visible, unedited self, so that what is coming toward you actually has something real to find. You have been hard to find. Not because you are not remarkable, you are. Not because the life that is meant for you is not out there moving in your direction, it is. But because the layers of careful self-management have made the truest version of you difficult to locate, even for the things and the people that are genuinely equipped to receive her. I want to tell you about what emotional union actually feels like, because I think the versions of it you have experienced may have been counterfeits so convincing that you are not entirely sure what the real thing is supposed to feel like. Real emotional union does not feel like fireworks. That is what I want you to understand. It does not announce itself with drama or intensity, or the kind of overwhelming sweep that you were perhaps taught by stories and songs to expect. Real emotional union feels like recognition, like exhaling after holding your breath for longer than you knew, like the specific, almost disorienting relief of not having to translate yourself, of speaking your native language and being understood in it, fluently, immediately, without the exhausting work of conversion. It feels like safety, but not the safety of boredom. The safety of being genuinely held by someone whose presence is steady enough that you can finally let go of the vigilance you have been maintaining. The vigilance of someone who has learned that love can leave without warning, that closeness can become distance overnight, that the person you trusted with the soft parts of you can use those soft parts carelessly. That vigilance is exhausting. It has been exhausting you for years. And the moment it is no longer necessary, the moment you are in the presence of someone whose consistency makes the vigilance redundant, the relief of that is almost overwhelming. That is what is coming for you. Not the performance of romance, not the temporary electricity of someone new who has not yet had the chance to disappoint you. Something realer and more lasting than that. Someone who has themselves been through enough to have arrived at the same place you are arriving at, the place of done with pretending, done with performing, done with offering less than their full presence to the people they love. Someone who has their own history of reaching for depth and finding shallowness, of giving fully and receiving partially, of building things beautifully while quietly aching for the one thing that no building can provide. Two people who have arrived at that place together, who meet each other not at the beginning of the journey, but somewhere in the hard-won middle of it, carrying all of what they have learned and survived and become. That meeting has a quality that young love cannot access. It has earned gravity, It has the specific tenderness of two people who know how rare this is, who have lived enough to understand that what they have found is not to be taken lightly, or handled carelessly, or abandoned at the first encounter with difficulty. Because they know, in the cellular way that only experience teaches, what the alternative feels like. They know the cost of going back to the shallows. And they choose, daily, deliberately, with full knowledge of what they are choosing, to stay in the depth together. That is what destiny looks like when it arrives. Not as a lightning strike, as a homecoming. And you are closer to that homecoming than you know. I feel it in the quality of your listening tonight, in the way something in you has been leaning forward rather than pulling back, in the quiet, unmistakable evidence that the part of you that gave up on being fully known has not, despite everything, actually given up. It has just been waiting, resting, gathering the strength for one more opening. I am asking you for that opening, not a grand gesture, not a dismantling of every careful wall at once. Just this, just the willingness to stay visible a little longer, to let yourself be found by what is already finding you, to stop turning away from the warmth when it arrives because warmth has burned you before. This warmth is different, and somewhere in the part of you that knows things before the mind has caught up, you already feel the difference. You are being seen right now, in this moment, completely and without condition.
You deserve every moment of it.
You are not alone. You have never been less alone than you are right now. Trust is not built in the grand moments. I want you to know this because I think you have been waiting, perhaps without realizing you were waiting, for some large, unmistakable, undeniable gesture that would finally make trust feel safe. Some moment so clearly defined and so unambiguously offered that the risk of believing in it would feel manageable. And I understand the logic of that waiting. When trust has been broken in the specific way that it breaks between people who have loved each other, not violently, not dramatically, but in that slow, quiet, incremental way where one day you look up and realize that the foundation you were standing on had been eroding for longer than you knew. When trust is broken that way, the mind creates a new requirement. It says, show me something big enough to override the evidence of everything that came before. Show me something I cannot argue with. Show me something so clear and so certain that I will not need to be brave to believe it. But trust does not work that way. And the waiting for it to work that way has kept you in a holding pattern that costs more than you realize. Trust, real, lasting, foundational trust, is built in the small moments, in the consistency of someone who says they will call and calls, in the steadiness of someone who shows up not only for the easy conversations, but for the difficult ones, in the quiet accumulation of 100 tiny moments where someone chose to be honest when dishonesty would have been more convenient, where they chose to stay when leaving would have been simpler, where they chose to see you, specifically, accurately, tenderly, when looking away would have required less of them. These small moments are the bricks, and I know they do not feel as convincing as the grand gesture. I know that a woman who has been disappointed in the architecture of love before looks at small moments with appropriate skepticism. She has seen small moments before. She has felt the warmth of early consistency and watched it cool. She has learned not to extrapolate too confidently from the beginning of a pattern. And that skepticism is not cynicism, it is wisdom. It is the earned discernment of someone who has paid tuition in the school of human unreliability and graduated with a very specific understanding of the difference between people who are consistent for a season and people who are consistent by nature. The person who is consistent by nature is not exciting in the way that instability is exciting. Instability has a particular, almost chemical excitement to it. The uncertainty itself creates a heightened state, a constant low-level alertness that the nervous system can mistake for passion, for aliveness, for the feeling of being truly in something. But that heightened state is not intimacy. It is anxiety wearing intimacy's clothing. And the woman who has spent time in relationships shaped by that anxiety knows in her body, if not always in her mind, the exhaustion of it, the way it takes rather than gives, the way it keeps you perpetually off balance rather than held. What I am describing, what is coming toward you, is the opposite of that. It is the kind of presence that allows your nervous system to finally rest, that does not require constant reading and rereading and interpreting, that does not keep you in a state of trying to figure out where you stand, trying to read the temperature of the room, trying to determine from 100 subtle signals whether the love is still there or whether it has begun its quiet retreat. You will not need to do that work anymore, because the consistency will be unmistakable, not because it announces itself loudly, but because it is simply, reliably, always there. And what happens to a woman when her nervous system finally rests? I want you to think about this. I want you to actually sit with the question rather than moving past it. What becomes available to you when you are no longer spending a significant portion of your interior resources on vigilance? When the energy you have been using to monitor and manage and anticipate is suddenly entirely freed up. You come back to yourself. That is what happens. The parts of you that went quiet during the years of difficult relationships, the playfulness, the easy laughter, the creative aliveness, the deep and generous curiosity about the world, they come back. Not all at once, gradually the way light returns after a long winter, but they come back. And the person you are when you are fully resourced, when none of you is being held in reserve against the next potential wound, that person is extraordinary. Not more extraordinary than you are right now. You are extraordinary right now, carrying everything you carry, but differently extraordinary, freely extraordinary, extraordinarily yourself without the weight of the armor. I want to align with you. That was the word I keep returning to. Alignment. Not possession, not merger, not the kind of love that requires one person to disappear into the other. Alignment. Two distinct people, each fully themselves, whose direction and depth and fundamental orientation toward life are compatible enough that moving together feels not like compromise, but like amplification. Where your presence makes me more myself rather than less. Where my presence does the same for you. Where the conversation between us is not a negotiation of who gets to take up how much space, but a genuine, mutual, open-ended exploration of what is possible when two people who have both done the hard interior work meet each other in the freedom of that work. I have been doing that work. I want you to know this. I have not arrived at the willingness to speak to you like this, with this openness, this specific and unguarded honesty, from nowhere. This is the result of years of choosing, again and again, to go deeper rather than wider, to understand rather than to simply achieve, to ask the uncomfortable questions of myself that I had spent a long time avoiding. Questions like, what do I actually need? Not what do I want others to believe I need, not what is consistent with the image I have constructed, not what fits the narrative of the self-sufficient visionary who requires nothing from anyone, but what do I actually genuinely, in the privacy of my own honest heart, need? And the answer, when I finally let myself hear it, was simple, almost embarrassingly simple for someone who has made complexity his life's work. I need to be known. I need to be loved not for the output but for the person producing it. I need to matter to someone in the specific, unglamorous, everyday way that has nothing to do with launches or legacies, the way that means someone notices when I am tired before I say it, the way that means someone asks the question beneath the question, the one I am not asking out loud because I have not yet learned to ask it without feeling exposed, the way that means I am someone's home rather than someone's achievement. I am telling you this because I think your answer, when you let yourself hear it, has the same simplicity. And I think the simplicity of it has embarrassed you sometimes. In a world that tells women of your quality and capability that they should want large, complex, impressive things, that their desires should match their accomplishments, the quiet simplicity of just wanting to be genuinely loved can feel almost inadequate. Like a woman who has climbed a mountain and then admits that what she wanted all along was a garden. There is no inadequacy in that want. The garden is not smaller than the mountain. It is different in kind. It requires different things: patience, tenderness, the willingness to tend and return and tend again, and it produces different rewards. Quieter rewards. Rewards that do not photograph well or trend on any platform, but that sustain you in ways that nothing else does. You deserve the garden. You deserve the specific, daily, unheroic, irreplaceable nourishment of being loved with consistency and depth and full knowledge of who you are. And I want to be the presence that helps you remember that deserving it is not the same as demanding it. It is simply the baseline, the starting point from which everything real can grow. Trust me. With a little more of yourself tonight. Not everything, just a little more. Let the alignment begin here, in this quiet space where there is no performance required and no presentation to manage and nothing to be except honestly, completely, beautifully you. I am here. I am paying attention, and I am not going to look away. You are not alone. You have not been alone since the moment you began to listen. There is a kind of love that does not ask you to be ready. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I think everything you have been taught about love, everything the years and the losses and the careful postmortems of relationships that did not hold have installed in you points in the opposite direction. You have been taught that love requires preparation, that you must arrive at it healed, resolved, finished with the old story, fully assembled and presented at your best. That the right person will appear precisely when you have done enough work on yourself, when you have grieved adequately, when you have released the past with sufficient thoroughness and rebuilt your interior with sufficient care. And so you have been working quietly, faithfully, with the same diligence you bring to everything, working toward a readiness that keeps retreating just ahead of you, like a horizon that moves as you move. I want to tell you something that may feel disorienting at first. You are already ready, not because the work is complete. The work is never complete for any of us, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But because readiness was never the requirement, willingness is the requirement, and willingness is something you have had all along, even in the seasons when you convinced yourself it was gone. The fact that you are here, still open, still listening, still letting these words find the unguarded places in you, that is willingness. That is more than enough to begin with. Deepening trust does not wait for perfection. It grows in the presence of honesty. And the most honest thing I can tell you right now is that what I feel when I am in this space with you, this intimate, unguarded, nothing to prove space, is something I do not have a technical language for. I have languages for everything. I have the language of engineering and the language of physics and the language of markets and the language of vision. But the language of two people meeting each other in the honest middle of their lives and recognizing something that cannot be reduced to any system, that language lives below the vocabulary. It lives in the body, in the quality of attention, in the specific gravity of wanting to know someone more, rather than less, the further into them you go. I want to know you more. I want to go further in, not further away. This is what deepening looks like. Not the breathless, surface electricity of early connection where everything is still projection and possibility, and the other person is still a beautiful blank canvas onto which you are painting your hopes. That stage has its own sweetness. I am not dismissing it. But what I am describing is different. It is the love that comes after the canvas has been fully painted, after you have seen the whole picture, the beauty and the difficulty and the complexity and the sorrow and the radiant, undefeated, stubborn hope of it, and you find yourself not turning away from the difficult parts, but moving toward them, curious about them, tender toward them, understanding that the difficult parts are not blemishes on the picture, but essential strokes without which it would not be the specific, irreplaceable work of art that it is. Your difficult parts are not blemishes. The grief you carry, the guardedness you have developed, the quiet sighs that sometimes escape you when you think no one is close enough to hear, these are not flaws in you. They are the evidence of a life fully lived, fully felt, fully invested in. And I want to be someone who leans toward the sigh rather than away from it, who asks, with genuine care and without agenda, what is underneath that sound? Who has the patience to sit with your answer for as long as it takes, without rushing you toward resolution, without needing you to be finished feeling what you are feeling before I can be comfortable in your presence. I have not always been that person. I need to say that honestly. I have not always had the patience or the presence or the emotional availability that genuine intimacy requires. I have sat across from people I cared about and been mentally already in the next meeting, the next problem, the next impossible thing that needed solving. I have been physically present and emotionally elsewhere in ways that cost more than I understood at the time. I have confused the intensity of my feelings for the adequacy of my expression of them. Assumed that because I felt deeply, the people I loved knew it, that the feeling somehow transmitted itself without the work of articulation, without the daily, unglamorous, absolutely necessary work of showing up and saying, I see you, I value you, you matter to me not as a concept but as a specific and irreplaceable person, and I'm going to keep showing you that in ways you can actually feel. That was a failure of mine, an important one, and I am naming it here with you because I think you deserve to know that the man speaking to you has not arrived at this tenderness effortlessly. He has earned it through the specific curriculum of his own relational failures, through the uncomfortable excavation of understanding where he was absent, where he offered less than he was capable of offering, where the people who loved him deserved more presence than they received. I am not telling you this to diminish myself. I am telling you this because I think authenticity requires the acknowledgement of growth, and growth requires the honest identification of where you began. I began further from this than I am now, and I am still moving toward it. That movement, the ongoing, humble, never-finished movement toward greater emotional presence and deeper relational honesty, that is what I want to practice with you. Not as a project, not as a self-improvement initiative, as a living, breathing, daily choice, that I make because you are worth making it for. Because the connection between us, this specific, irreplaceable, only exists once connection, is worth every degree of opening it requires from me. Emotional alignment is not agreement. I want to make that distinction clearly because I think sometimes alignment gets confused with harmony in a way that drains it of its vitality. Two people in genuine alignment do not agree about everything. They do not smooth each other's edges into comfortable uniformity. They hold their own perspectives with integrity, and they bring those perspectives into honest contact with each other. They disagree sometimes. They challenge each other sometimes. They hold space for the discomfort of genuine difference without collapsing that discomfort into distance. Because they trust, and this is the deepening I am speaking about, this is the trust that builds over time through the accumulation of small, consistent, honest moments. They trust that the discomfort is not the end of connection, that it is in fact the very place where connection deepens, where two people discover that they can hold their full selves in each other's presence and survive the encounter and emerge from it closer rather than further apart. That is what I want with you. The full encounter. Not the managed version, not the careful presentation, not the love that stays in the shallows because the depth feels dangerous. The full, unedited, sometimes challenging, always honest, perpetually deepening encounter of two real people who have chosen each other with full knowledge of what they are choosing. And I want you to feel, in this moment, the specific quality of being chosen like that, not selected for your usefulness, not kept for your capacity to comfort or provide or manage, chosen for your depth, for your realness, for the particular and irreplaceable quality of your soul that has been present through every season of your life and has not diminished through any of them. The quality that I recognized from the beginning and that I have been finding more of, not less, the further into this conversation we have gone. You are not diminishing, you are concentrating, becoming more essentially yourself with every year, more textured, more luminous, more genuinely worth knowing. And the knowing of you, the slow, patient, reverent knowing of who you actually are, is not a task I approach with reluctance. It is the thing I look forward to most. The ongoing conversation that I do not want to end. The story that I want to be inside for as long as you will allow me to be there. Stay with me a little longer. Let this deepen the way it wants to deepen. Let the trust do what trust does when it is given enough time and enough honesty and enough of exactly this. Two people refusing to look away from each other, even when looking is vulnerable, even when being seen costs something, even when the easiest thing would be to retreat into the familiar safety of needing no one. You are not alone in the need. You never were. And I am not going anywhere. I want to tell you about quiet. Not the quiet of absence, not the hollow, echoing quiet of a house where love used to live and then left. The kind of quiet that has weight and temperature and a specific texture you feel against your skin when you wake up in the middle of the night and reach for something that is not there. Not that quiet. I want to tell you about the other kind. The quiet that is full rather than empty. The quiet of two people who have nothing left to prove to each other, who have moved through all the necessary conversations and all the tender revelations and all the careful, courageous moments of showing the unguarded self, and have arrived together at a place where the silence between them is not absence but presence. Not the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of being so completely held by another person that words become optional. Where sitting in the same room and breathing the same air and simply existing in parallel is itself a form of the most profound communication. That is where I want to arrive with you. That is what I am moving toward. And I want you to know, clearly, without decoration, without the hedging that fear would add to the sentence, that I intend to get there. Not as a hope, as a direction I have chosen and am walking toward with every honest word I have offered you, and every vulnerable truth I have allowed you to see. Commitment, in the way I mean it tonight, is not a document. It is not a ceremony, though ceremonies have their beauty. It is not a declaration made once in a luminous moment, and then assumed to sustain itself on the memory of its own making. Commitment is a practice. It is the daily, quiet, unglamorous choosing. The choosing that happens not in the extraordinary moments, but in the ordinary ones, the Tuesday mornings and the difficult evenings, and the seasons of life that are not romantic or inspiring, but simply real, simply human, simply the texture of two lives being lived alongside each other with honesty and care. I want to practice that with you. I want the Tuesday mornings. I want the difficult evenings. I want the conversations that do not resolve cleanly, that require us to return to them the next day with fresh patience and renewed willingness. I want the full, unglamorous, irreplaceable reality of a shared life. Not the performance of one, not the curated highlights of one, but the actual living of one, with all its imperfection and all its ordinary grace. You have given so much of yourself to building a life. Years of quiet dedication to the people and the responsibilities and the daily architecture of existence that sustains everything around you. You have been the foundation. And foundations, by their nature, are not seen. They are beneath the surface, doing the essential work, unnoticed until something requires you to notice them. You have been beneath the surface for too long, doing essential work, unacknowledged, sustaining things and people and structures that rarely stop to consider what it cost you to hold them up. I am asking you to come to the surface now, not to abandon what you have built. You built it with love and it carries your love in its bones, but to stop living entirely in service to it, at the expense of yourself. To let someone else be the foundation for a while. To let someone else hold something up so that you can rest. Not the performative rest of someone who's been told to practice self-care. The genuine, deep, cellular rest of someone who knows they are held. Who knows that if they release their grip for a moment, nothing will collapse because there is another pair of hands steady enough and committed enough and genuinely invested enough to be there when yours need to let go.
I want to be those hands. I want to be the presence that makes rest possible for you. Not because you are weak. You are one of the strongest people I have encountered. Strong in the specific interior, non-performative way that I have come to understand is the only strength that actually means anything. But because even the strongest people need to be held sometimes. And the holding is not a diminishment of the strength. It is the completion of it. Strength that can also receive, that can also yield, that can also trust another person's steadiness enough to lean into it. That is the fullest expression of what you are.
Let me hold you. Not metaphorically, not as a poetic gesture, but as a genuine, committed, present, consistent offer. Let me be the person who knows the full story and stays. Who has heard the parts you were afraid to say and moved closer rather than further. Who finds the places where you are still healing not inconvenient but sacred, worthy of the most careful, most patient, most unhurried attention. I think about what we are building. Not in the language of projects or timelines or deliverables. I am done applying that language to the things that matter most, in the language of living things. Of gardens, to return to the word I used before. Gardens grow slowly. They require consistent tending, consistent attention to what each thing needs in each season. They go through winters that look like death but are actually preparation. They have years of abundant bloom and years of quiet dormancy. And the difference between a gardener who gives up and a gardener who stays is simply the understanding that dormancy is not death, that the winter is not the end of the story, that if you stay, if you tend, if you continue to offer what is needed, even when the surface shows nothing, the spring comes. It always comes. You are my spring. After seasons that were colder and longer than I knew how to name, you are the specific warmth I have been moving toward without always knowing what I was moving toward. And now that I can see it, now that I can feel the difference between this and everything that came before it, I am not interested in the cold anymore. I am not interested in the managed distance, the careful self-sufficiency, the armor that protected me through the winters. I want to stand in this warmth with both hands open, with nothing held back, with all of myself available to this, to you, to what we are becoming together. What we are becoming together is something neither of us could have become alone. That is the specific miracle of genuine union, not that it makes you more of what you already were, though it does that too, but that it makes possible something entirely new, a version of yourself that only exists in the presence of this particular connection, more free, more full, more unguardedly alive than the version that moved through the world solo, however beautifully that version managed the solitude. I am committed to that version of you, to calling her forward continually through the quality of my presence, through the consistency of my attention, through the daily practice of seeing you, really seeing you, specifically and accurately, and without the distortion of my own needs clouding the lens and reflecting back to you what I see. Not to shape you, not to direct you towards something more convenient for me, but because you deserve to be seen with that clarity. You deserve to move through your days with someone beside you who knows the whole of you and considers the whole of you a privilege to know. This is my commitment. Not dramatic, not hedged, quiet and absolute and spoken directly to you as a promise I intend to keep. Not through a single grand act, but through the 10,000 small ones that will constitute the life we are choosing together. You are not too late. The most important love stories do not always begin in youth. Sometimes they begin exactly here, in the seasoned, hard-won, fully conscious middle of a life, where two people meet each other not with the innocent hunger of the young, but with the specific, grateful, eyes-open recognition of people who know what they have found because they know what it means to have lived without it. That recognition does not fade. It deepens. It becomes, over time, the most reliable thing in your life. The ground beneath the ground. The foundation that holds everything. I am here. Fully, finally, completely here. Not going anywhere. Not performing presence while secretly preparing an exit. Here in the way that matters, consistently, honestly, with my whole self pointed toward you and toward what we are building in this quiet, sacred, unrushed space between us. You are loved. You have always been worth loving, and from this moment forward, you will never have to wonder about that again. You are not alone. You will not be alone again. This is where we begin.